I'm an avid hunter. I go every season and I love it. More often than not, I don't kill any game, but I just love getting out and into the woods. I don't know if you're familiar with hunting season in Pennsylvania, but during late November, rifle season is in full swing. It was already the second week of the season, and I had yet to bag any deer, so I was eager to get to it early in the morning, and I did. I normally get up at around 5 a.m. and drive to my hunting spot. It's private land that my grandfather owns. Him and I are the only two who hunt on it, and the rest is posted to hunters. And the only others on that land are employed on my grandfather's farm. I had originally planned on calling my grandfather when I woke up and ask him if he wanted to tag along, but the weather was more than horrendous in the morning. The snow was pouring down and the wind was really strong. I love hunting in the snow, but it almost made me decide not to go. So I knew he wouldn't want to. The roads were really bad, so it took me a bit longer to drive there. Normally, the sun would be starting to rise by now. However, it was overcast and snowing. Regardless of the snow, I walked up to my spot. It was directly behind my grandfather's house, over a hill and back about 100 to 150 yards. Almost immediately upon sitting in my spot, I hear things moving all around me. Honestly, I didn't pay too much attention to it. It could have been a number of things, but it was still pitch black, and the thought of it was kind of creeping me out. But there wasn't much I could do. It's not like I can shoot at anything, so I just ignored it and continued to wait. It wasn't much longer after that I began hearing something walking just over the ridge to my right. At this point, there's barely enough light to see my feet, so even if it was a deer, there was still nothing I could do. However, I could tell it wasn't a deer. I just assumed it was my grandfather walking to his spots, which is just a short walk from mine. But the lights in the house were off, and if he was up here, I'm sure he'd let me know prior. Even if it wasn't him, it was a hunter. Albeit hunting illegally. I still wanted to let him know I was here. So I turned on my flashlight and pointed into his direction, flashing it several times. Again, even if it was a deer, I couldn't shoot it. So I felt it was better to be safe rather than sorry. Nothing happened after that. After I flashed my light, then the noise stopped, which was really odd. I didn't see them turn back or hear them, so I figured they either A, sat down right there after seeing my light, which was considered extremely rude, or B, I didn't hear them walk off. I just assumed it was the latter. An hour or so passes, and finally the first sights of daylight start to shine through. It's still snowing, and the snow is falling in entire snowballs, rather than snowflakes, so visibility is pretty limited. I, around this time, noticed that an odd-looking lump protruding from a group of trees. The shrubs atop the hill that separates me and my granddad's house, right where I had movement earlier. It looked like a mound of dirt. However, it was sticking out from the side of a tree, so obviously it wasn't dirt. Naturally, I raised my rifle to take a closer look. I could tell immediately that I was looking at the side of an older-style camouflage coat. It took a minute, but it finally clicked. That was a person over there. I just thought it was a hunter, so I didn't know what to do about it. I knew if he was hunting on our land illegally, and from that I could see he wasn't wearing anything orange, which is required of all hunters during the rifle season. And I could tell just from looking, whoever this was wasn't my grandfather. I sat there for a minute debating my next move, but I decided to call my granddad, at the risk of blowing his stunt if that was actually him over there. So, without taking my eyes off this guy, I put on my phone and dialed his number. To my dismay, he picked up, and I told him what was going on. So he told me that he'd make his way up, but I decided on my own to give this guy a whistle, to let him know I see him. But he didn't react at all. After a few minutes, I started to walk up to this guy. After walking a short distance, I could clearly see this guy, who was sound asleep tucked in between a shrub and a couple of trees. He obviously thought out here was a great place to lay down, as I would never be able to see him and his coat was not stuck out. And as I thought, He had no orange on. I gave him another whistle, much louder, and he woke right up, almost immediately shuffling over to hide his exposed coat. He had a nasty, scruffy beard and a gray hat. Honestly, he looked like a harmless old homeless man, probably in his 50s, but he had a perfect view of my granddad's home from his spot, and I had a pretty good idea that he was planning to do once my granddad left the house. Was this guy realized he'd been caught, and he'd saw a 6'5" mad guy carrying a rifle. He started freaking out. His face went pale, and almost instantly he tried to feed me some bullshit that he'd gotten lost during a drive with a group of other hunters. A drive as a coordinator pushed through a thicket in order to drive deer to hunters sitting at the edge of a designated driving area. However, the closest public game land is miles from the spot, so I knew it was a lie. He just wanted to keep on going on about how he was lost and how he fell asleep. He even went as far to make up a fake name on the spot. I just stood there and listened, making sure he didn't give me any fishy movements. I couldn't help but think that what this guy was going to do to my grandfather. God knows if he had the chance, and the thought pissed me off. November last year, me and my friend decided to drive up a car to Scotland to do some fishing and eventually make our way to Edinburgh. After the first day of catching some salmon and brown trout, we stored our catchers in the cooler box. After contemplating whether to sleep in the car tonight, as we had left quite late to set up camp, at around 4:30ish and the sun was going down, eventually, I said, let's set up a fire and cook the fish. I didn't drive all the way to Scotland to sleep in the car. My friend agreed as we set off looking for a spot to camp. We found a little wooded area next to a car park near a farm. We looked into it prior, and apparently you can basically camp anywhere in Scotland, as long as you left the place as you found it. So, we grabbed all of our shit out of the car and started setting up our campsite. 20 minutes later, we had a fire going, 2 fold-up chairs and 2 tents up. My tent was out of view from my friend. This will be relevant later. We were glad we chose to camp outside instead of sleeping in the car, as we smoked a few joints and we reminisced about school, life, and etc. My friend struggled to keep his eyes open as I checked my phone. 2 a.m. he called it a night, crawling into his tent and zipping it shut. I sat there with my feet up on my friend's now empty chair, listening to sounds of the wildlife. I shut off the torch and had hung up on the tree next to us, leaving it in the darkness, apart from the burning embers from the coal. It must have been 3 or so minutes before I started to hear the crunching of leaves and snapping of twigs. It seemed to be coming toward me. Being a quite rational person, I passed it off as a fox drawn to the scraps of food we might have laying around. I was quickly proven wrong when I heard a sniffle, like someone with a coal clearing their nose. My high quickly turned from chilled out to paranoia as I feel a heavy dread come over me. My mind raced. Why the fuck would someone be here in the woods at 2-3 a.m.? Why are they coming towards me? I slowly reached down the pocket and felt my heart drop as I didn't feel the smooth blade of my pocket knife. Shit, I must have left it in a tent. All the while I hear the treading coming closer and closer and my heartbeat racing. Out of the darkness I see a middle-aged man, clean-shaven, parted hair, around 5'10", slowly creeping toward me, almost in all fours like a predator, trying to stay out of sight. I sat there paralyzed and unable to speak. My mouth was so dry that I could hardly swallow. That's when I realized he hadn't even seen me. Being under the tree with no light source, I must have blended in. Also, with there only being one tent in view, I guess he thought my friend was the only one camping here. He got closer to the tent and half breathed and half whispered, "Come on, do it," in a raspy voice. Creeped the fuck out and unable to bear the thought of what he might do next. "Boy, can I help you?" He jumped up in shock and his whole demeanor changed. He looked at me mumbling awkward as he scurried back out of the woods. I sat there, still trying to comprehend what had just happened when I saw. Then I saw headlights of a car turn on and drive away. I woke my friend up, and he could not tell what had happened, but he could see how shook up I was. Without full explanation from me, he willingly grabbed all our gear and we slept in the car that night with the doors locked. Being a forest ranger isn't always as cool as it sounds. Usually, it's pretty boring. It can get very redundant. But, on occasion, we see some pretty spooky things out here in the Ocala National Forest. The story I'm going to share with you today happened somewhere around the Lake George area. Recently, I have been extra vigilant while roaming the woods. We have had several reports of what people thought could be an exotic pet loose. Some people reported seeing a chimpanzee, and others, a Bigfoot. I have been looking for any sign of chimp or chimpanzees in the area, scouring the ground for droppings, looking through the trees, etc. I honestly thought people were just freaked out by the recent pictures of what some lady alleged was a skunk ape. I felt like it sparked a reaction of hysteria. I personally never been one to believe much of the Bigfoot stuff, but this day still makes me think twice sometimes. As I was exploring around Lake George, I heard what sounded like a very large branch snap from high above me. I couldn't quite place where it came from, since the birds were very loud that morning. I tried to shrug it off, but I had this incredible feeling of being watched. I started to walk back towards the way I came, when suddenly, the woods went quiet. No birds, no bugs, not even the wind. Just eerie silence. I heard another branch snap, but this time, much closer than before. I began to really get nervous, because I've never experienced the woods this silent before. Not even with bobcats, panthers, or wolves around. I began to walk at a brisk pace, to try and not look like fleeing prey. But I get about 200 feet away, when I hear a loud wailing, which I can only describe as monkey-like. Suddenly, sticks and rocks are being tossed at me from the tops of the trees, and a whirlwind of noise erupts. I run as fast as I possibly can to get to my vehicle and get the hell out of there. The thing that freaked me out the most, though, is that there was nothing in the trees. That they were completely empty. I looked up and it was fall time, so most of the trees were pretty bare. I so have no idea what happened that day, and I just don't really talk about it because I don't want to sound insane. Being a forest ranger, I've seen a lot of creepy and unexplainable things in the woods. To save your time, I will spare you all the little encounters and just share the one encounter that sticks with me day to day. I was walking deep within the woods. I was trying to map my way out and do an excursion, kind of on my off time. I didn't get very much time off from the park, so any time that I could just get off into the woods by myself and camp was definitely time that I utilized. I was walking through the woods, trying to find my way to where I wanted to go. I would usually go off trail, and I was struck by this weird feeling. It kind of felt like I was being watched. But I kind of shrugged it off as me just, maybe being paranoid or something. I found a nice little clearing about 500 feet up, and I decided this is where I would camp for the day. I started setting up my tent and got a fire going. Soon it began to be dark. As I was sitting around the fire, cooking some hot dogs I had brought along the way, I noticed that feeling of being watched came again. But here's the creepy part. Most people would say that they see these creepy eyes or these crazy colors in the sky or whatnot. I didn't see anything like that. But what I saw was something much more terrifying. What looked like to be a man hanging from a noose, was just on the outside of the light of my camp. All I could see was the silhouette of 2 feet dangling, about 6 feet up in the air. What was really odd is that none of these trees had branches. These were all pine trees. So, I freaked the hell out. I've shone my flashlight there, but there was nothing there. Maybe I was just worrying and I was overtired or something. So, I go back in my tent and try to sleep it off. I have nothing but nightmares and awful dreams all night and wake up at probably about 6 in the morning. The sun is starting to come up, so I pack my stuff quickly and get the hell out of there. Out of all my years being in the woods and being a survivalist and things of that nature, I still have no idea what that was. In 2004, I was 15 years old living in central Minnesota. I had hunted on my grandparents' property east of Sandstone since I was 12 and had been fairly successful each year. That season was the same as most, going hunting with my dad and older brother for opening weekend and then trying to get out hunting whenever I could after that. I think it was around the second weekend when I had one of the most scariest experiences of my life. On this particular day, after an unsuccessful morning hunt, my brother and I were walking back to the main house to the woods and decided to walk up to the road instead of trudging through a snowy field. Parked on the property, about 40 yards off the road, was a pickup truck. We didn't recognize it. We approached cautiously, but the truck was abandoned and there were tracks leading off into the woods in several directions. In the front of the dash was a pile of mail addressed to someone with the last name Gamble, a name not associated with any of my family or nearby neighbors. My brother and I decided that we just head back home and let our dad know about it, since there was little else we could do or knew what to do. When we said the name we had seen in the window on the mail, my grandmother immediately recognized the name. "Oh, that's a lady who lives a few miles away from here." My dad jumped on the four-wheeler to go see if the truck was stuck or broken down and offered to help. But when he got down there, a mere 20 minutes after my brother and I initially saw the truck, it was gone. Without any cause for alarm, we all basically forgot about it, as we had a warm lunch and swapped hunting lie stories from the morning. After a post-lunch nap, we all mapped out the morning hunting strategies, and we headed out to our stands until dark. This is when the story gets good. I was sitting in my stand, lost in thought but constantly gazing around and trying to spot movement or flashes of brown and white. I was deep in thick brush on the edge of a swamp that borders a hardwood stand on trees. It was a favorite spot for the afternoon hunts to get deer as they migrate towards the fields as it gets dark. Suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a flash of brown to my right. I was trying to identify exactly what it was, before I saw it again as it slipped behind a pile of brush once again. I figure it'd be about 50 yards away and moving my way. I lifted my 30-30 Western Field lever action to my waist as I stood in the stand and silently slipped the safety to my off position. For several long minutes, I saw and heard nothing. I began to question if I had seen anything at all or if my imagination was finally taking over after me being fooled by squirrels for several hours, when suddenly I heard a low noise coming from the thick brush. It sounded like a growl sound. My first thought was that a wounded deer was going through its dying moments from the neighbor's property to the east. Suddenly, the low growl turned into a distinct growl and snarl. My mind immediately went from lurking for a wounded deer to looking for a bear. It wasn't uncommon to see bears in the area, but the thought of one being so close was both exciting and nerve-wracking to a 15-year-old me. The growls grew louder, and I saw the brush move slightly as the unseen bear moved closer to my stand. I placed the safety back on my weapon, but kept it at my waist. The growling stopped, and then it turned into a snarl and screaming sound that caused my heart to immediately drop in my chest in pure fear. I had never heard a bear make that sound, and I suddenly knew it was a wildcat of some sorts. The brush movement that I finally saw the animal for the first time. About 35 yards away, I had gone from expecting a deer to a bear to a wildcat of some sort, and while I wasn't wrong, I did not expect in the least what I saw in front of me. 35 yards away, in the woods of Minnesota on a November day, was a Bengal tiger that had been 8 feet long, with orange and black stripes. A Bengal tiger. I had seen them in books and at the zoo, but I had no frame or reference of what I was witnessing. I immediately threw at my gun. I turned the safety off and hammer cocked. My hands shook and I thought I was going to throw up. While it was likely less than 30 seconds, I felt like I was staring in shock of the tiger for at least an hour before it snarled, screamed once more, and bounded into the woods to the north. I stood in my stand for several minutes, until my leg shaking became paralyzing as the adrenaline wore off and the reality of which has happened came over me. I asked myself over and over if I had just seen something that was real. In my frozen fear, I contemplated shooting the apparition in front of me, sense and my sights the entire time, but I didn't because I wasn't convinced that it was really real. I didn't have a cell phone, so contact from my brother or dad was impossible to do. But I do know one thing. I did not want to be in the woods in the dark with that thing nearby. I was also less than eager to immediately get down and walk to the house with him nearby. So I sat this stand for 20 minutes in the ready position looking for any set of the tiger. When I didn't see anything, I got out of my stand and started the longest walk back to the house possible. I walked the entire 1/4 mile through the woods with the gun up in the ready position. Every twig breaking made me feel like a tiger was leaping towards me in the growing darkness. Needless to say, my family was skeptical when I rushed to tell the story of the evening's hunt. They believed I had seen something, but the tiger part was hard to swallow. They figured it was likely a wildcat or a mountain lion at most, but I insisted that I had seen what I had seen. Regardless, we began to get ready for Wednesday night church, and the conversation continued until we got inside church. The small country church is composed of mostly extended family members, and so we had several relatives visiting for hunting that were mingling and talking about their hunts thus far. I immediately walked up to my cousin Sky, who owned and hunted the land adjacent to my grandparents. My dad jokes that he heard a ridiculous story that I made up about my evening. I was barely into the story when my cousin exclaimed, "Oh, you saw the tiger too." My dad was floored and I was vindicated. Slowly, the story began unfolding with answers. The white truck belonging to the Gambles was the connection piece. Cynthia Gamble lived several miles from our property and owned a large wildcat sanctuary. While the cats were all in cages and tied with GPS monitors, apparently one had escaped and several neighbors reported seeing it. She went and looked for it, and by the following day, we had heard from those that knew the Gambles that the cat had been returned. But there was never any official word that had gotten loose. Being that far out in the country, with little population and evil lighter traffic, sightings of the cat by others than the family are limited if they happened at all. Everything went back to normal and I had a killer story to share with no one that believed. We live in a small town, on the outskirts of a large city. It's a small street and a few small forests nearby. Me and my best friend, who at the time were maybe 7, were over at our other good friend's house. We opened the back fence door and his dog ran off. This was odd because she was very well trained. She never disobeyed him. So, we waited outside in the driveway. We were facing toward the creek in his backyard, and behind the creek was another street and a small forest. We turned the corner around his little shed to look over. Since we enjoyed the view, we see something massive walking between the two trees. It seemed to hide behind one after we saw it. Both me and my friend almost peed ourselves. This thing was massive, 7 or 8 feet and covered in hair, and it had a weird disfigured face. No, you might be thinking this is just a child's imagination. But my friend saw it too, so I can't really write it off as just that. I didn't really have a wild imagination either. Even when I did, I could always tell the difference between that inside my head and what the real world was. And I never really exaggerated either. Plus, my friend saw it too, so I know it's true. Still to this day, we talk about what we saw in the woods that day. We all really know what it was or what it could be, but it definitely is one of the creepiest things I have ever experienced. I went camping with 3 of my buddies, John, Bennett, and Kyle. We do this every year. It's kind of a bro trip to reconnect with each other. We were all fresh out of college and decided to go to our yearly camping trip in August. We are from Oregon and ended up camping in the woods there like we usually do at the same points. The first day was great. We set up our spot, explored the area, and by the time the sun was setting, we set up a campfire and made dinner. After a few too many beers and some s'mores, we decided to go to sleep. It was a perfect way to end the day. Our second day was basically the same thing. Hiking, food, 1 too many beers. But this night, we ended up being not so perfect. I remember watching some videos on YouTube, and we were laughing and it was interesting. As we finished the rest of the beers, we were wrestling around with each other like guys do, and John stopped messing around and froze. Everyone was confused, but John claimed he heard something nearby. I told him it was most likely a squirrel, and he said, no, it was most definitely not. He was scaring me at this point, and I decided to resume the tackling session and I took him down. We forgot about the whole thing until about 10 minutes later. We were tired from wrestling and joking around, so we decided to put the fire out and head into the tent. We had a 6-person tent for anybody wondering, so we were all in one tent. Just as our only light source, besides your flashlights, went out, I heard a slight cackle. I assume it was one of those boys because we were all clearly a bit buzzed, so everything is fine. I wanted to see what was so funny, so I turned the flashlight directly into Bennett's face. I thought he was the one laughing. Bennett's face was white as a ghost. He looked at me and said, "Did you guys hear that?" I said, "The laughing?" and Kyle said, "That wasn't you." We were all shaken and decided to go into the tent, silent. As we got into the tent, I pulled out an axe that I used to cut the wood. It was the only source of protection we had. I was on the very end of the tent with Kyle and John, and in the middle was Bennett. We were all silent, but I knew we were all wide awake after hearing the laughing. We weren't exactly an actual campsite, where there were other people around. We just walked into the woods, found an open spot and set up camp here. We were about a mile from our car with barely any cell signal, so I guess you could say we weren't exactly in the safest position if there was a crazy maniac around. I got tired, so I dozed off. I have no idea how long I was sleeping before I heard laughing again. It's hard to describe other than it sounded menacing. It was frozen, and I didn't move. I didn't even try to look over to see if my buddies were awake. The axe was near my pillow. As I mustered enough strength to move to get the axe, I saw what looked like someone's finger pressed up against the tent, circling around the tent. Someone was definitely outside, walking around her tent, laughing. When they got to the front part of where the tent entrance was, they stopped. About 5 seconds went by before the person furiously shook the tent and screamed. That's when I knew my buddies were awake as well, because Kyle screamed like a little girl right after. Whoever was behind the tent laughed and again walked off. We laid there the rest of the night, wide awake and definitely sober. We didn't want to move out of pure fear that whoever was out there was still there. When the sun came up, we packed up everything and walked back to our car. We still go camping every year, but this time we go to legit camping sites. I now bring a judge or a gun with me, and not just an axe. Whoever was outside our campsite could have easily been a deranged homeless person, psychopath, serial killer, meth head, or just an asshole playing a prank on us. But I sure as hell won't camp in a rural place anymore. Stay safe out there. It's a dangerous world we live in. My friend and I live in the southeastern area of Wisconsin. We love to go big for hunting. My friend lives in a subdivision near some woods. When we go to an empty lot and throw rocks and bash logs on the set of trees. We never really had an encounter until we decided to stay late and possibly stay the night. It was about 10:30, and I was about 5 feet away from the edge of the forest, just throwing rocks. But I stopped as I heard something moving very slowly through the woods. The rustling stopped, and a rock the size of a softball came flying towards me. It landed about 1 or 2 feet away from me. I took this as a warning and yelled to my friend that we needed to go. We began sprinting towards our bikes when we heard it running through the brush. It sounded like a bear or something shaking the trees. Ashbury rode our bikes away. My friend asked, "What the heck was that?" I was too scared to speak. My friends and I never slept that night. The next day, we did some research. Here nearby, there have been quite a few Bigfoot sightings. We know it wasn't a bear because bears don't live this far south in Wisconsin. Some of you may not believe this, but just know, I swear to God, I'm not lying.